Hi everyone, we're going to start covering the critical reasoning section, both for the GMAT and the GRE. Remember that in the GMAT, the critical reasoning is a separate section, but the GRE pretty much lumps it together with the reading comprehension, although the critical reasoning is a completely separate section that has its own separate rules and strategies. So we're going to deal with it in this series of videos. So in this video, we're only going to cover the general aspects of the critical reasoning section. We're going to cover each specific question type and rules of logic and possible mistakes in separate videos. So this is just kind of an overview. So principles to follow for the critical reasoning section. The first principle is that only the information provided exists. Remember, this is a principle that we pretty much use also in the reading comprehension section. And is that only the information that is provided exists. So we do not bring outside information. We do not correct any information that we think is wrong or that we know to be factually incorrect, like compared to real life. So we just take whatever information they are giving us. This is important because a type of mistake is people assuming or bringing out or completing the information that is presented. Remember, don't do this. Only the information provided exists. The second principle is to remember that we're dealing with arguments. Remember that an argument is a set of premises that lead to a conclusion. So every single text in the critical reasoning section will be an argument, okay? Both in the GMAT and in the GRE, every single text has an argument. So sometimes the conclusion is not part of the prompt, sometimes the conclusion is in the alternatives, but altogether there has to be an argument. Another principle, remember, you have to follow the logic rules. This is important because the basic thing for the argument, like the argument provided in the critical reasoning section, is that you reach the conclusion, or we're supposed to reach the conclusion by following logical rules. So we're not just supposed to reach the conclusion by what we want to be true or by what we would like to be true. There has to be some backup. So things we want to do in the critical reasoning section, we want to be specific. Remember, we take the specific meaning of each term. So, and if we want to choose an alternative, we have to also consider the specific meaning of each term. We want to always find the argument. Remember, we have to find the premises and the conclusion. Every single question has premises and conclusion. Sometimes, as I said before, the conclusion is not part of the prompt, but there has to be conclusion somewhere. And the third thing I want you to know is that you have to use logical language or symbols. So when you find the premises and the conclusion, the premises in the text will be written as normal, natural language. So there will be full sentences in English, right? But when you want to locate the premises and work with the premises, especially for the logical rules, you don't want to use the full sentence, the full natural language sentence. What you want is to use logical language or symbols. So if you remember your logic classes from college or from high school, just use that. We are going to have a series of videos to explain some of this, but then again, if you don't have the time, let's say you're just taking the exam in 1 month, so you don't really have the time to practice or getting familiar with all these symbols, just drop it. Don't do it. Just do use whatever technique it's useful for you. But if you do have the time, I advise you to start dealing with those. This is like learning math or math symbols, right? So when you're learning math, when you have a word problem in math, you don't pretty much cover or transform the equations with word problems. So you don't write something like, okay, the number of students times the amount of time, right? We don't do this, right? We actually write like X times Y, like we replace the full natural language with variables and symbols. We don't even write the word times. We just write an X that symbolizes the multiplication. So the thing applies to the critical reasoning. So in this case, the critical reasoning is it's more similar to the math section than to the variable section. Okay, the fourth thing you want to do, you want to read the question first. This way you can locate what type of question you're dealing with. And this is important because different questions have different strategies. There's a general strategy for the whole critical reasoning, but then there's a specific strategy for each question type. And finally, you want to eliminate the wrong answers. I have a specific video about process of elimination. I'm also going to talk about this in this video, but I'm not going to go in depth. So if you want to go in depth to the process of elimination, I recommend you to go to the process of elimination video that is in this channel. Okay, things you don't want to do. You don't want to treat it as reading comprehension. As I said before, the GRE pretty much lumps the critical reasoning section as with the reading comprehension section, but it's not the same thing. Reading comprehension, you don't always have an argument. In reading comprehension, you don't really care about rules of logic. There are a different set of rules. Even the inference question is a completely different question, okay? So you do not treat it as a reading comprehension. There are some rules that apply here, like the only information in the text exists and the process of elimination, but still treat it as a completely different question type. Another thing you don't want to do, you don't want to follow hunches. So maybe you're a pretty rational person and usually you're right in your day-to-day life, but you still want to back up every single conclusion that you make, okay? Like every single conclusion has to have a logical reasoning to it. So you cannot just follow hunches and mark an answer just because it feels right or it feels reasonable, okay? Like the feeling is not a reason. And finally, don't leave unanswered question. Remember, it's better to go wrong than blank, and definitely don't take too long to consider each question. This goes for everything, but especially in the critical reasoning and in the math section, like you are pretty much creating new thought processes or creating new ideas or going through new or considering new information. But at the end of a certain amount of time, maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes, you're no longer creating new reasonings or new thoughts. You're pretty much just going in circles with the same ideas over and over. So just learn to let go and move on to the next question. Okay, the general strategy for the whole critical reasoning section. Again, remember there are specific strategies for question type, but this is just the general strategy that you want to follow. The first thing you want to do, you want to identify the question type. Okay, so we're going to identify the question type. Is in an inference question, is in a weakened question, is in a strengthening question. Again, I'm going to give you a list and then I'm going to have one video per question type. So the first thing, identify the question type. The second thing, we want to identify the conclusion and then identify the premises. So remember every single prompt or every single question has a conclusion and premises. Sometimes the conclusion is not part of the prompt. So sometimes you won't be able to identify the conclusion because basically they're asking you for conclusion, for example, in the inference question. But remember, again, this is just the general strategy. The fourth thing you want to do, you want to apply the rules of logic. This is the next video I'm going to upload here is the rules of logic. So I'm going to give you an in-depth description of all the rules of logic you have to apply here. And finally, you want to use process of elimination. Again, I'm going to explain this in this video, but if you want a more in-depth explanation, go to the specific video. So the first thing, to identify the question type. These are all the question types that we're going to cover. You have the assumption, support, weakened flow, inference, paradox, evaluate, boldface, and then a lump of minor question types. There's a specific video for each of these. So the first thing to do is you identify which question type it is, and then you apply the specific strategy to that question type. The second step is to identify the conclusion. Sometimes conclusions have a marker word like thus, therefore, or literally conclude that, or in conclusion, or for this reason. Sometimes there is no marker for the conclusion, but there's a logically kind of follow up to the conclusion. So maybe it's just a period marking the end of the paragraph. And then you can see that definitely the last sentence was the conclusion. Maybe the first sentence is the conclusion. Okay, so first identify the conclusion. Remember the conclusion, it's, as its name says, like what is concluded from the premises or the facts or even opinions that they're provided in the text. The third thing to do, you identify the premises. Again, sometimes the premises will be marked by words like because, since, for, when you're adding more premises together, like moreover, besides. Again, sometimes you don't have a marker for these premises, so you just have to know whether they are giving you facts. Usually the premises are facts, okay? So they give you information that will lead to a conclusion. And remember, usually the conclusions are also facts, but sometimes are opinion. Okay, the fourth thing we want to do, we want to apply rules of logic. The two most popular rules are the modus ponens. So let's say if P causes Q and then you have P, then you have Q because Q is caused by P. And modus tollens, like if P causes Q and you don't have the instance of Q, then you don't have the instance of P. And then all the others that we're going to see in this specific video. Again, in the specific video where I explain all the rules of logic, I'm going to go with two strategies, right? One that goes kind of strictly using like a logical notation, and another one that pretty much is trying to use a more natural language notation so you don't have any problems. So if you do have the time, I advise you to try to work with these. Again, you're not going to work with variables all the time, but you are going to replace these. But I do advise you to work with the symbols, right? Like learn the arrow for therefore and the and that you can also use like this if you remember anything from high school or from college. If you don't have the time, forget about it, but still treat it as just getting the main idea and not focusing on the whole sentence. And finally, we're going to use process of elimination, which means that every single alternative that is not your answer, okay, every single one has a mistake. Because if it didn't have a mistake, it would be your answer, okay? And this is very important because sometimes people are between two, and instead of trying to find a mistake, they're trying to find which one is the right answer. So when you're between two or even three, or even when you can have no idea, just use process of elimination. This is a completely valid way to get the right answer. So basically, typical mistakes for alternatives are the wrong word, extreme word, opposite information, out of scope, or true but not my answer. Again, I have a specific video of how to apply process of elimination. Okay, finally, remember that it's all about logic. Remember, it's not about hunches. It's not about what you think is the best thing or what you like the most or what agrees with you. So it's about how to apply the rules of logic, and every single conclusion has to logically follow from the premises. Also, remember that you can practice with premises and conclusions from your everyday life. So maybe you work a lot, maybe you do a lot of work and you spend a lot of time commuting, so you don't really have the time to sit down and study. Maybe you have time to kind of read some passages or do exercises, but not really practice that much. So I want you to try to practice in your everyday life with applying rules of logic. So all the time we're pretty much creating arguments, even when we talk to other people or when other people try to convince us of something. Maybe you can see this in politics a lot. So I want you to start practicing kind of deconstructing the arguments from other people, seeing what are their premises, what are the conclusions, what are the logic, what is the logic that they're following, what are the possible logical mistakes they are making. This is a very helpful tool. Again, if you don't have the time to sit down and study, like this is kind of an active way of studying using just your everyday life. Okay, that is it for the overview of the critical reasoning section. We're going to continue with the rules of logic, and then we're going to see each question type in depth. Okay, so thank you for watching. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and write any questions that you may have, any comments, and I'll answer them. And see you in the next video. Bye.